It's not too late to prevent the Third World War. We are well on the way, but it's not too late. And what the world needs, I would say, is reassurance. And I've taken the definition of reassurance here from ChatGPT. I think it's a satisfactory definition. And the need for reassurance is particularly acute for all the reasons that Kevin Clements have just explained to you. And my list of all the bad things that are happening in the world today is here. Not all of them, but all the ones that I could include on one template. But I want to remind you about what I say down on the right-hand side, and that is that this region, East Asia, remains peaceful in the sense that there is not war between states yet. And this peace has lasted for more than 40 years. The last war in East Asia was between China and Vietnam in 1979. This is a great achievement, and it is due partly to reassurance. So what can one do to preserve that peace? That's my question. When we hear strategists and politicians talk today about strategic affairs, they talk a lot about deterrence, and they sometimes also talk about compellence. Deterrence means to prevent someone from doing something that you don't want them to do, or coerce it, and compellence means to make them do something they don't want to do, but you want them to do. What I am going to argue now is that you cannot make deterrence or compellence work unless you match it with reassurance. Because if you try to deter by building as many arms as possible, the other one will build arms as well. And it will lead to what is called a security dilemma, where both parties fear the other, and at some point the war breaks out. But if you match deterrence with reassurance, it may work. The one who said this very clearly in a classic work is the winner of the Nobel Prize, Thomas Schelling, in his book Arms and Influence from 1966, where he makes the point that if you want to prevent someone from entering the door and you point the gun and you say, if you enter, I will shoot you, then that also means that if he or she does not enter, you will not shoot. So there must be promises inherent in deterrence for it to work. In addition, reassurance leads out of the need for deterrence and can provide the way for peace building, for confidence building, and for cooperation. In East Asia, there are certain crisis zones, and I will just mention first here Taiwan, because Taiwan is a specifically acute situation. And for a long time, all the time since the rapprochement between China and the United States in the 1970s, Taiwan has been the subject to a US policy that I call double deterrence. It's also sometimes called strategic ambiguity. The double deterrence means that the United States is on the one hand deterring Taiwan from declaring itself independent, and on the other hand deterring China from using force against Taiwan. And each of those two deterrences are at the same time reassurance of the other, because by deterring China from using force, the United States reassures Taiwan. And by deterring Taiwan from going independent, it reassures China from something that obliges China to use force in a law from 2005. This is a complex and unsatisfactory situation around Taiwan, but it's the best there is, because it guarantees a kind of status quo which has allowed Taiwan and mainland China to build a very strong economies and welfare in their two countries. Here I put up some of the aims of reassurance, where I distinguish between the immediate needs for reassurance, which is mainly conflict prevention, and the more long-term aims, which are to lead towards a cooperative world. We could talk much about that cooperative world before, and we should do it still, but it's not immediately on the cards. As far as I'm concerned, I think that the immediate thing is to avoid the worst to happen. We need to build competence and knowledge about the various kinds of reassurance that are available to policymakers. And at a time when you have the kind of mutual suspicion that you have in the world today, in this volatile world, there is mainly a need for unilateral initiatives, reassuring initiatives, because it's not really possible to agree between adversaries. So what you need are these unilateral initiatives, restraint, various goodwill offers, declarations of intent, transparency is extremely important, and then invitations to start cooperation. And then in the longer term, you can have more bilateral and multilateral cooperative reassurances. There are examples in history that we can study, a lot of examples from the Cold War, of how one part or one state in the Cold War reassured the other, although there was acute adversity between them. Here's just a list of some of the very many examples that it can possibly study. I also want to mention some examples of Chinese restraint in Southeast Asia, which are slightly reassuring, but are normally seen as very provocative. And here I want to emphasize that in the South China Sea, China has not used armed force to shoot since 1988. Despite all it does with the Philippines and with Vietnam, it has not opened fire. And when it has conducted military exercises around Taiwan, it has warned people in advance by putting out maps of where they are going to be. They have crossed the median line in the Taiwan Strait, but they have not crossed into Taiwan's territorial sea. So there is certain limits to what they have done, and that are meant to also to prevent it from leading directly to war. And it has also refrained from intervening militarily in other countries, and here the place where it's most tempting to intervene is in Myanmar, because China has such great plans for Myanmar, for transportation corridor down to the Bay of Bengal. But so far, China has been reticent. It is mediating between forces inside Myanmar, but it's not intervening militarily. We should, to some extent, appreciate this, even though we see China as assertive. And I also want to mention one initiative, in fact, taken by President Donald Trump. At the moment, most people don't say anything positive about President Trump, and I don't want normally to do it either. But I want to honor him for one thing, which was that he cancelled military exercises near North Korea in order to get closer to Kim Jong-un in 2018. And that worked wonderfully, except that the whole negotiation broke down afterwards. But also Trump can reassure. Skeptics have a tendency, when I speak about reassurance, to say that it doesn't work because it doesn't change the adversary's behavior. And they sometimes say that it's like pouring water into a bottomless bucket. But this points out that if you are the target of reassurance, if you see that your adversary reassures you in some way, a very wise choice is to respond with a reassuring measure yourself. So there will be reassurance from both sides. In my conclusion is that reassurance plays a vital role in maintaining peace and stability in international relations, and particularly in situations like those that we have today. So what the world really needs now is reassurance and cooperation. And I would call on civil society organizations, diplomatic academies, foreign affairs ministries, UN agencies, that they all study the history of reassurance and how it has prevented war in the past, and build repertoires of appropriate measures for various contingencies. This should be part of the toolbox in every foreign ministry. And the Toda Peace Institute will do its best to help. Thank you.